My daughter gave away my dog Rusty without telling me, saying he dirtied the house and ate too much. I am Sylvia, 75 years old, a retired midwife living as a guest in my own home. She doesn't know that without the dog, her security turns to dust. The midday sun beat down heavily on the poorly paved streets of our neighborhood. I was walking slowly, dragging my thick-soled shoes and carrying 2 canvas grocery bags that weighed more on my soul than in my arms. At 75, the body no longer responds with the same rush as before, but my legs still hold me up. For over 40 years, I was the midwife of this area, back when this was nothing but wild brush and the streets didn't even have names. My hands, now covered in dark spots and bulging veins, brought half the neighbors into the world people who today won't even give me a good morning. I know the smell of life. The sweat, the blood, and the cry of that first breath. I know that life is dirty and loud. That's why the absolute silence that greeted me when I opened the gate to my own house froze my blood instantly. Normally, the sound of the rusted hinges was the signal for Rusty to shoot out from the backyard. I would hear the clicking of his thick nails against the concrete, followed by a happy panting and the thud of his coarse brown tail against the walls. Rusty was a big dog, a mutt mixed with Belgian Malinois, with a rough toasted coffee coat and amber eyes that understood everything before I even opened my mouth. But that afternoon, there was no clicking, no panting. Just the hum of the central AC that my daughter Marcy kept running at all hours. I left the bags on the kitchen counter. The air smelled of bleach and artificial lavender disinfectant, a smell I absolutely despise because it masks reality. In the corner of the laundry room, where Rusty's aluminum bowl and his old wool blanket always sat, there was nothing. The floor was damp and freshly mopped. A cold knot settled in the pit of my stomach. I shoved my hand into my apron pocket and squeezed my heavy iron keychain tight. Those keys are old. They open the original padlocks on the gates my late husband installed decades ago. Gripping them always gives me a sense of grounding, reminding me that this land, even though it's now covered in porcelain tile and minimalist furniture, is still mine. I walked into the living room. Marcy was sitting on her white sofa, the one nobody is allowed to touch without washing their hands first. She was typing on her phone, legs crossed, an iced coffee resting on the glass table. She wore her flawless gym clothes, her hair pulled back without a single strand out of place. Her husband Felix, a man with soft hands and an even softer spine who works at a bank, wasn't home. "Where is the dog?" I asked, my voice flat, trying to control the trembling in my lips. Marcy didn't even look up from the glowing screen of her device. "Mom, that animal ruins everything," she said, with a casualness that hit me like a slap to the face. "He leaves hair on my new rugs. He smells like wet hound and eats too much. I gave him to a family out in the country. He'll have room to run and get as dirty as he wants out there. He'll be happier." I stood paralyzed. The words bounced around inside my head, making no sense at first. She gave him to a family in the country. Rusty wasn't a throw pillow you donate when it no longer matches the living room. Rusty had slept at the foot of my bed for 9 years. He was my shadow, my companion, the only living, breathing thing in this giant house who actually noticed if I kept breathing through the night. Without looking away, I managed to speak, feeling like the air was being sucked from the room. "You took my dog, the only companion I have. And you got rid of him while I was out buying your vegetables." Marcy sighed with annoyance, locked her phone screen, and finally looked at me. Her eyes, so much like her father's, didn't hold a single drop of guilt. They were filled with that condescending impatience children develop when they decide their parents are no longer people, just antique furniture that must be tolerated. "Oh, Mom, please don't start with the drama. We already talked about this." "Well, I hinted at it plenty of times. This house isn't meant for an animal like that. Felix and I spent a lot of money remodeling the downstairs so you could live comfortably with us. The least we expect is to keep the place clean. Besides, you couldn't even take proper care of him anymore. He was struggling to get up. He is a living being, Marcy." I raised my voice, feeling the hot rage rising in my throat. He's not a rug, he's my dog. 9 years he's been with me. 9 years watching over me. We watch over you, Felix and I. She snapped back, crossing her arms. We pay the electric bill, the water, and we buy your medications. The dog was an unnecessary expense and a breeding ground for infections. It's done, Mom! The people who took him live 2 hours away. I don't even have their direct number because it was through an internet group, so please don't ask me to bring him back. Go rest. I'll put away the groceries. I wanted to scream. I wanted to raise my hand and slap her across the face like I never did when she was a little girl, just to see if it would wake her up from her bubble of selfishness. But experience has taught me that uncontrolled anger is useless. As a midwife, I've been in situations where life hangs by a thread, where mothers are bleeding out or babies aren't breathing. In those moments, panic is death. You have to keep a cold mind and steady hands. I squeezed the iron keys in my pocket again. I felt the jagged edge of the metal biting into the skin of my palm. The physical pain anchored me to reality. I turned around without saying another word. I walked down the long hallway leading to my bedroom, dragging my feet a little more than usual. The silence of the house now felt deafening. I stepped into my room and closed the door carefully. Here, inside my 4 walls, the smell of Rusty still lingered. A smell of dry earth, sunshine, and loyalty. I looked at the foot of my bed. There was the sunken impression on the small, worn-out rug where he spent his nights. For 9 years, the rhythm of his breathing was my lullaby. When the arthritis wouldn't let me sleep and the pain made me cry quietly so I wouldn't wake anyone, Rusty would get up, rest his heavy head on my knees, and lick my hand until I calmed down. I sat on the edge of the mattress, my knees trembling, and finally, the tears I had held back in front of Marcy began to fall. I cried in silence, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. I cried for my dog, scared and confused in some faraway place, surrounded by strangers, wondering why his owner had abandoned him. I cried for the humiliation of being treated like an unwanted guest in the very house I built, brick by brick, with my late husband. But above all, I cried for my daughter's immense ignorance. Marcy thinks that just because she installed some cheap security cameras at the entrance and swapped the heavy wooden door for a shiny aluminum one, we are safe. She lives deeply deceived by her own sense of superiority. Doesn't she realize that our house, even though it's now surrounded by new subdivisions, backs right up to the old canyon and a stretch of unclaimed wasteland? That area has always been a highway for thieves, drifters, and people with bad intentions. She doesn't know the true value of the dog she just threw away over a few stray hairs in her white living room. Rusty wasn't just some lapdog. 8 years ago, when the break-ins in this area started getting violent, an old friend of mine, a retired cop whose wife I helped deliver triplets, offered a hand. He trained K-9 units for the state police. He saw massive potential in Rusty. For months, he came by in the afternoons to train him. Rusty was conditioned to guard the exact perimeter of our property. He knew the limits of the back wall like the back of his own paw. He was taught not to bark like an idiot at the wind, like the neighbor's dogs that howl at flies. Rusty waited in the shadows. If someone tried to hop the fence, he wouldn't make a sound until the intruder was fully inside. Then, he would let out a low, deep growl, baring his teeth, cornering the person without biting unless I gave the command, or until the stranger tried to run. Over the last 5 years, Rusty stopped 4 different men who tried to break into the house in the dead of night. Every single time, my daughter and her useless husband were sleeping soundly beneath their high thread count sheets with the AC blasting. They never heard a thing. I would walk downstairs in my nightgown with my flashlight and my old walking cane, open the back door, look at the thug paralyzed by absolute terror inches from my dog's fangs, and simply tell them to crawl back out the way they came. Then I would pet Rusty's head, and we would go back to sleep. That dog was the true and only guard of this glass fortress Marcy thinks she lives in. I wiped my eyes hard. The crying stopped dead, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The pain was still there, pulsing like an open wound, but the midwife's mind took control. I stood up and walked over to my dark wood nightstand. I opened the top drawer and pulled out my old cell phone, the kind that only makes calls and sends text messages. Marcy thought she had left me defenseless. She thought that because I was old, widowed, and tucked away in the back room, I had no power over my circumstances. She forgot that the deed to this house is still in my name. She forgot that the only reason they got to live here rent-free was the agreement that I would have peace and respect in my final years. And most of all, she forgot that security is an invisible privilege you only notice the second it disappears. I stepped up to my bedroom window facing the backyard. I saw the tall weeds of the wasteland peeking over the top of the old brick wall. There would be no moon tonight. Tonight, the wall would be unprotected. The neighborhood thieves know how to watch. They have patience. They had surely already noticed the absence of the massive brown shadow that used to patrol the grass. I wasn't going to beg Marcy. I wasn't going to plead with Felix to help me find my dog. They broke the sacred family pact. By tossing Rusty out like trash, they tossed me out. They told me, without using words, that my feelings and my well-being were worth less than the cleanliness of their furniture. I took a deep breath, feeling the warm air fill my tired lungs. My fingers, agile despite the years and the wear, dialed a number from memory. I didn't call the police or an animal shelter. I called my lawyer, Arthur, a man from my own generation who understands that deals are respected until the grave. I listened to the ringtone 3 times before his raspy voice answered on the other end of the line. "Sylvia, what a miracle! Is everything all right over there?" he asked kindly. I looked out the window one more time. The afternoon shadows were starting to stretch across the damp grass, the very same grass where Rusty used to lay and soak up the morning sun. "Arthur," I said, my voice steady, not a single syllable trembling. "My daughter gave away my dog. She said he makes a mess and eats too much. She sent him out to the country and won't tell me who took him." There was a brief silence on the line. Arthur knew Rusty. He knew the history of the house, and he knew Marcy's intentions to take the whole lot and build luxury apartments the minute I died. "I am so sorry, Sylvia. That dog was worth his weight in gold," he replied, instantly grasping the gravity of the situation. "What do you want to do? Do you want me to have someone investigate the adoption groups to track him down? We can threaten her with a lawsuit for theft of property. Legally, the animal is yours." I pressed the receiver hard against my ear. My gaze locked onto the back fence, imagining the shadows that would soon start climbing over it when the early morning hours hit. "No, Arthur. That will take time, and time is exactly what we don't have right now. I want you to come over tomorrow first thing in the morning with the house papers. All the papers. Are you sure, Sylvia?" The lawyer's voice shifted, becoming more professional, more cautious. "Completely," I replied, feeling the weight of my 75 years transforming into a relentless force. She broke the rules. She took away my guard, my family. And like I told her, well, I didn't tell her, but she'll know very soon without the dog. The deal for the house is canceled. And without the dog, tonight they are going to learn the true terror of living on the edge of the canyon. Prepare the eviction notice. I placed the old phone back on its base with a slow but firm motion. The plastic smacking against plastic echoed in the silence of my room like a judge's gavel handing down a sentence. I had taken the first step. Arthur, a man of his word and old-school law, was already drafting the documents that would put an end to my own daughter's abuse. However, legal paperwork takes time. It demands signatures, stamps, and bureaucracy in government offices that smell like stale coffee and damp paper. And I, even with the patience that comes with age, couldn't allow my dog to spend a single night thinking I had betrayed him. I stood next to the dark wood nightstand, still feeling the jagged outline of my iron keys inside my apron pocket. Those keys are heavy. They weigh as much as history weighs. As much as memory weighs in a house that has been stripped of its soul to be filled with white furniture and useless glass decorations. I walked over to the small window in my room and pulled back the thick fabric curtain just a sliver. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip behind the houses on the next block, painting the sky a bruised purple that announced the arrival of night. The tall weeds in the empty lot bordering our backyard swayed in the warm breeze. From here, the brick wall my late husband built with his bare hands looked imposing, but I knew the truth. I knew that without the constant, silent, and threatening presence of Rusty, that wall was nothing but a stepping stone for the street punks who crawl up from the canyon when the city goes to sleep. I let the curtain drop and sat in the wicker chair in the corner. It was time to think with a cold head, like a midwife. I learned early in life that panic is the worst enemy of survival. When a woman is in bed, sweating, screaming in agony, blood staining the sheets, and the child refusing to come out, you can't sit there and cry with her. You have to evaluate what you have on hand. Hot water, clean towels, herbs for the pain, the strength of your own hands, and the iron will to force life to carve its path. At 75, society, and my daughter Marcy in particular, has decided that my time to be useful has passed. Old age is a very peculiar invisibility cloak. When you pass a certain age, people stop looking you in the eye. They look at your forehead or your shoulders, or they simply look right through you. They assume that because your steps are slow, your thoughts must drag along too. They think the selective deafness we use to ignore their stupidity is a flaw in our ears, and not a protective measure for our mental peace. Marcy and her husband Felix look at me like an old antique, a breathing lump they only tolerate because I gave them the big part of the house so they wouldn't have to pay a mortgage. They think my silence at dinner when they talk about their trips, their green juice diets, and the renovations is submission. They don't realize that the silence of the old is actually pure observation. I observe how Felix leaves the sliding glass door in the kitchen unlocked because he's too lazy to push the latch all the way down. I observe how Marcy never fixed the motion sensor light in the backyard because it made the freshly painted wall look ugly. And anyway, Mom's annoying dog always warned them if there was anything out there. I observe how they blindly trust 2 little security cameras bought online that don't even have real night vision. They have built a fortress out of tissue paper and believe themselves invincible. I got up from the wicker chair and walked to my closet. Behind my dresses and my mothball-scented folded sweaters, I keep a small cedar wood box. I opened the lid, and the smell of ancient wood filled my lungs. I didn't look for jewelry, because I never had any. My husband and I invested every penny into the foundation of this house and into Marcy's education. An education that filled her head with numbers, but emptied her chest of empathy. What I pulled from the box was my most valuable asset. An old, legal-sized notebook with black vinyl covers, cracked from time and use. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. The yellowed, crisp pages were filled with my cursive handwriting. It was my log. The name of every mother, the date, the time, the baby's sex, and the address of every delivery I attended in this neighborhood and the surrounding ones since 1978. Here lay the secrets of hundreds of families. Here were the lives I pulled back from the brink of death when there were no hospitals nearby and no money to pay a city doctor. Marcy thinks Felix's money in the bank is power. Poor fool. True power in this world isn't measured in bank accounts. It's measured in loyalties. It's measured in the number of people who remember who handed them a lifeline when they were drowning. I flipped through the pages with my index finger, feeling the rough texture of the paper, until I found the year the triplets were born, to the wife of Elias, the retired cop, the very man who had trained Rusty. I jotted down the phone number for his son's house, where Elias lived now. Then I looked for the record of Shirley's daughter, the woman who runs the Sunday flea market. Her daughter went into labor in the middle of a massive storm 22 years ago. I walked 10 blocks in knee-deep water to reach her tin roof shack and save them both from a guaranteed hemorrhage. That baby boy born on that stormy night is now Bobby, a brilliant kid who spends all his time on computers and manages all the local internet groups. With the numbers in hand, I picked up my old cell phone again. The first call was to Elias. When he heard my voice, he was thrilled, but his tone shifted to a cold, contained fury the second I told him what Marcy had done with Rusty. That animal isn't just any dog, Sylvia. Elias told me, his raspy voice clearing his throat on the other end. That dog has tactical training. If they throw him in a pen with farm animals or chain him up, he's either going to get depressed or turn aggressive from the stress of not having a clear territory to patrol. Did she tell you which town they took him to? She didn't tell me anything, Elias. Just that it was through some internet group and the family lives 2 hours out in the country. She refuses to give me the details. Don't worry about it. I know half the highway patrolmen in this region. A lot of them owe me favors. I'm going to put the word out. A dog that size, with his traits, doesn't go unnoticed. And if I have to, I will personally show up at your daughter's door and drag the information out of her. Badge or no badge. Leave my daughter to me, Elias, I replied with a calm that surprised even myself. I just need you to help me track him down. I will handle what happens inside this house. The second call was to Bobby. The kid answered quickly, surrounded by the noise of loud music and clacking keyboards. When I told him who I was, he turned the volume down instantly. Miss Sylvia! It's been forever. Whatever you need, you name it. My grandma always tells me if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be here being a pain in the ass. I explained the situation. I asked him to scrub through all the adoption and livestock buy and sell groups for the city and the surrounding rural towns. I gave him Rusty's description, the dates, and even the exact words Marcy, with her usual classist attitude, would have likely used in the post. Piece of cake, Miss Sylvia, the kid assured me. Those rich folks always use the same Facebook pages to give away whatever doesn't match their living room anymore. Give me a couple of hours. I'll find the post, the profile of the guy who took him, and even his IP address if they want to play hardball. I'll text you. I closed the black vinyl notebook and put it back in the cedar box. A wave of peace washed over my chest. My invisible net was activated. My army, the one Marcy despised for being blue-collar, flea market, street-level people, was mobilizing for me and my dog. Now, all that was left was to set up the second part of my plan. The lesson. I heard the sound of the front door opening and slamming shut. It was Felix. I heard his nasal voice greeting Marcy, followed by the clatter of his keys dropping into the ceramic bowl by the entrance. I heard the routine kiss, the murmur of his complaints about traffic and his job at the bank. I stepped out of my room and walked down the hall toward the kitchen. I needed a glass of water, but mostly, I needed to survey the terrain. When I walked in, Felix was loosening his silk tie while Marcy poured him sparkling water into a tall glass. Seeing me, Felix forced a condescending smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good evening, mother-in-law," he exclaimed, raising his voice unnecessarily as if I were deaf. Marcy already told me about the doggy. It was for the best. Believe me, that breed needs a lot of country, a lot of space. The poor thing was just suffering here, and honestly, the house was starting to smell terrible. You'll see, you'll get used to the cleanliness in no time. I stared right at him. His hands, soft and perfectly manicured, held the glass with an almost feminine delicacy. This man wouldn't know how to change a tire, let alone defend his home from an intruder. His entire manhood resided in his gold credit card and the digital locks he had installed on the front door. "Good evening, Felix," I replied, completely ignoring his speech about the dog. My voice sounded flat, devoid of inflection. Marcy looked at me out of the corner of her eye, surprised I wasn't making a scene or crying. She sighed with relief, thinking I had already surrendered, that I had accepted my place as the harmless old woman who follows the rules of the youth. "Mom, I left some chicken breast in the fridge in case you want dinner," Marcy said, adopting a fake maternal tone. "Felix and I ordered sushi. But I know you don't like raw food." "Thank you. I'm not hungry. I just came for water," I said, opening the cupboard to take out my thick glass tumbler, the only one that doesn't belong to her imported set. As I filled the glass from the dispenser, my eyes drifted toward the sliding glass door leading to the backyard. It was large, beautiful, and let in a lot of light in the mornings, but the lock, a cheap metal latch at the bottom, was loose. I had warned them about it months ago. I told them the wood frame was rotting from the condensation of the AC and the latch wasn't catching properly. They called me paranoid. They told me no one was going to jump such a high wall, and besides, we live in a residential neighborhood. The area might have changed its name, but the canyon is still the same. And the people who walk the bottom of that canyon on moonless nights are still the same too. I drank my water in silence. They went back to talking about their own things, some new app on their phones, completely ignoring my presence. I was invisible again, but this time, invisibility was my shield. I turned around and walked back down the long hallway to my room. I wasn't going to warn them. I wasn't going to ask them to check the locks or turn on the patio lights. For 9 years, Rusty was the alarm and the wall. For 9 years, my dog did the dirty work of keeping the darkness at bay so they could sleep, dreaming of their promotions and their vacations. They decided to tear down the wall. Now it was their turn to meet the dark. I walked into my bedroom and didn't turn on the light. The shadows embraced me immediately, familiar and protective. I pulled my iron keys from my pocket. I selected the longest, thickest key. I slid it into the antique lock of my solid wood door, the only door in the house that survived Marcy's remodel, because I planted myself in front of it and refused to let the carpenters touch it. I turned the key. The metallic clack of the double deadbolt sliding into the frame was loud, final. My room, located at the back of the house, but fitted with wrought iron window bars my husband installed, was a bunker. I walked over to the chair by the window. I sat in the darkness with the black vinyl notebook resting on my knees, my eyes glued to the brick wall in the yard. The house's central AC hummed in the background, creating a white noise that would lull my daughter and her husband to sleep. But I wasn't listening to the hum. My ears, trained to hear a baby's first cry through adobe walls, were tuned to the sounds of the night, the snapping of dry branches in the empty lot, the sound of the wind rattling a tin roof somewhere far away, the subtle brush of something climbing the exterior wall. Felix and Marcy believed danger could be erased by running a bleach-soaked mop over the kitchen floor. They had no idea that true cleanliness in this world sometimes requires everything to get dirty with fear first. I pulled my shawl over my shoulders and settled in to wait, knowing that the dead of night always brings with it the truth the day tries to hide. The analog clock on my wall pointed to 2 a.m. The house was submerged in that kind of heavy silence you only feel when the whole world seems to have stopped breathing. I was still sitting in my wicker chair, wrapped in my dark wool shawl, eyes wide open, staring through the crack in the curtains. The darkness in my room was absolute, but my pupils, accustomed to long nights of keeping watch, could already make out every shadow in the backyard. The hum of the central AC suddenly cut out. Marcy's thermostat, always programmed to save energy during the early morning hours, killed the white noise flooding the house. That was when the night came alive. Without the motor of that machine masking reality, the sounds of the canyon began to bleed through the walls. As a midwife, I learned to listen to the human body. I can distinguish the faint heartbeat of a baby tangled in its umbilical cord, the sigh of relief from an exhausted mother, and the cracking of pelvic bones making way for life. Listening is an art that requires patience. That's why, when the first strange sound broke the calm of the empty lot, I didn't panic. I just tightened my grip on the iron keys resting in my lap. It was a dry scrape, the sound of a rubber sole dragging against the porous bricks of the back wall. I shifted in my seat, feeling my own heartbeat pulsing in my temples. For 9 years, this was the exact moment a low, deep, guttural growl would have rattled the window panes. Rusty would have risen from his corner, muscles coiled, hackles raised, planting himself in the middle of the lawn like a bronze statue. The intruders would have heard that warning sound and dropped right back down into the brush, knowing that on the other side of that wall waited a beast trained to tear their legs apart. But tonight, there was no growl, no warning, just the dull thud of a heavy body landing on the damp grass of our garden. I held my breath. Through the slit in the curtain, I saw a dark silhouette slowly straighten up. Then another shadow dropped beside him. It was 2 men. They stayed perfectly still for a solid minute, crouching among the rose bushes Marcy had planted last spring. They were waiting. They knew the reputation of this house. The whole underground knew the old woman Sylvia had a dog that didn't bark, but hunted. One of the men pulled something from his jacket and tossed it toward the center of the yard. I saw the lump land on the grass. It was probably a piece of meat laced with poison or sleeping pills. An old, cowardly tactic. They waited another minute. Nothing moved. The house remained dead silent. "Told you, man," one of them whispered, his raspy voice carrying all the way to my window. The gardener down the block swore the snobs here got rid of the dog this afternoon. The beast is gone. The other man let out a short, almost inaudible laugh, but it was loaded with a confidence that turned my stomach. They stood up with total ease. They were no longer walking in a crouch. They walked like they owned the place, trampling the flowers and leaving deep mud tracks on the light flagstones lining the empty pool. My left hand felt around for my old cell phone on the nightstand. I turned it on under my shawl so the glow of the screen wouldn't give me away. I dialed Elias, the retired cop. I knew he was awake, scrubbing the internet groups and working his contacts to find my dog. He answered on the second ring. "Sylvia, I don't have news on—" "They're inside, Elias." I cut him off, my voice reduced to a whisper of pure ice. Two men just jumped the wall. They're heading for the sliding glass door in the kitchen. There was a fraction of a second of silence on the other end. The old cop's mind ran the calculus instantly. "Do not leave your room for any reason," Elias ordered, his tone razor sharp, leaving no room for argument. "I'm 5 blocks from your house. I was just interrogating a kid from the market. I have my piece. I'm calling Sector Patrol right now, but I'll get there first. Lock your door and don't make a sound." "The deadbolt is already thrown," I replied, and hung up. I peeked through the curtain again. The men were already on the patio. One of them clicked on a small flashlight, the kind that barely throws a sliver of bluish light, and aimed it into the kitchen. The beam danced over the stainless steel appliances and the granite countertops that gave Marcy so much pride. The taller man pulled a metal pry bar from his pants and slid it into the track of the sliding glass door. Felix, in his infinite laziness and arrogance, never fixed that latch. The lock gave way with a pathetic metallic snap that almost made me feel sorry for it. The great fortress of the modern couple, their glass castle, had been breached in under 3 minutes. They slid the door open. The damp smell of the canyon and rancid sweat crept into the house, instantly clashing with the ridiculous scent of artificial lavender. I heard their boots step onto the freshly mopped porcelain tile. One step, then another. I stayed seated in the dark, gripping my keys. I wasn't going to go out. It would be downright stupid of me to try and face 2 young armed criminals. My role tonight wasn't to play savior. My role was to be a witness. Marcy had made a unilateral decision regarding the security of this family, ignoring my voice, my experience, and my property. Now, life was about to teach her a lesson no expensive university ever could. The silence inside the house shattered with the sound of kitchen drawers being yanked open and dumped onto the floor. They were looking for silverware, car keys, the wallets Felix usually left on the breakfast bar. I heard hurried whispering. They were nervous, but greedy with how easy the score was. Then, the footsteps moved toward the main living room. That's where the giant flat screen, the gaming consoles, and the imported decorations were. Suddenly, a dull crystalline crash ripped through the early morning. One of the thieves tripped over the coffee table. I heard the crunch of glass shattering against the floor, followed by a curse muttered through gritted teeth. Upstairs, in the master bedroom, the noise was loud enough. I heard the squeak of the springs in my daughter's expensive mattress. Bare feet hit the hardwood floor of the upper level. It was Felix. "Marcy, did you leave something on downstairs?" I heard him ask, his sleep-heavy voice echoing down the stairwell. The thieves froze. Silence fell over the house again, but this time it was an electric silence, thick with a tension that choked the air. Felix flipped on the upstairs hallway light. The yellow glow spilled down the steps, illuminating the wrecked living room. "Who's down there?" Felix yelled. His voice tried to sound authoritative, but it cracked on the last syllable. It wasn't the voice of a man ready to defend his home. It was the voice of a scared little boy. I heard his footsteps slowly descending the stairs. Every step was a fatal mistake. If Rusty had been here, Felix would have never had to go down. The dog would have kept the intruders pinned against the wall, paralyzed by the terror of his fangs, until the cops arrived. But Felix was walking down alone, unarmed, wrapped in his silk pajamas, straight into the jaws of the wolf. "Freeze, motherfucker!" A voice barked from the living room. I heard a sickening thud, the sound of a heavy body slamming against the white sofas. Felix let out a high-pitched scream, a hoarse, panic-stricken wail that chilled my blood despite my resolve. "Don't hurt me, please. Take whatever you want." My son-in-law begged, instantly. All his arrogance, all that condescending attitude he treated me with in the afternoons, vanished in a second. He was crying. He was crying with the exact same high-pitched tone newborns make when the cold air hits them for the first time. Upstairs, Marcy woke up in a panic. "Felix! What's going on, Felix?" My daughter screamed, leaning over the railing. "Shut your mouth and get down here, bitch! Or I'll blow your husband's head off!" the second thief roared. Terror flooded the house. Marcy started screaming hysterically. I heard her feet tripping down the stairs, her muffled sobs, the sound of her knees hitting the floor when they forced her to lie face down next to her husband. I was still in my room, 50 feet down the hall. I could hear every jagged breath, every insult, the sound of things being ripped off the walls. My motherly instinct, the same one that drove me to work from sunup to sundown to pay for Marcy's schooling, was screaming at me to open the door, to go out there with my cane and defend my blood. But my midwife's mind, cold and calculating, kept me anchored to the chair. If I went out, they would kill me, or worse, they would use me to force them to open the safe. I couldn't do anything physically. My job was already done. Help was on the way. In the distance, bouncing off the canyon walls, the high-pitched wail of a siren began to bleed into the night. The thieves heard it too. "The pigs are coming, man! Let's go!" One of them yelled, panic staining his voice. I heard the thud of backpacks stuffed with electronics banging against the walls as they ran toward the kitchen. "The car keys! Give me the keys!" the other demanded, kicking something or someone on the floor. Felix groaned in pain. "I don't have them. They're by the front door. Please, don't hit me anymore." My son-in-law sobbed. The siren was getting closer. Red and blue lights started flashing against the front windows of the house. Then, I heard the violent screech of tires skidding on the pavement of our street. It was Elias. He had beaten the patrol car, cutting through back streets he knew by heart. "Out the back! Run!" The two men abandoned the idea of taking the car. I heard their boots slip on the wet kitchen tile, the crash as they hit the aluminum frame of the sliding door, and their frantic footsteps crushing the lawn. They vaulted the wall with the same agility they used to get in, disappearing into the pitch-black canyon, swallowed by the very weeds they crawled out of. A few seconds later, Elias's heavy fist pounded on the front door with enough force to rattle the windows. "Police! Open the door!" my old friend bellowed, his voice like thunder cutting through the chaos. Inside, the house fell into a silence broken only by Felix's pathetic whimpering and Marcy's uncontrollable sobbing. They crawled across the floor, paralyzed with terror, until they reached the entryway. I heard the sound of the digital locks being fumbled with by shaking hands. The door flew open. Elias's voice, demanding to know if they were okay and asking for a description of the suspects, filled the living room. Right then, the sector patrol pulled up, sirens blaring, slamming on the brakes in front of our gate. The crackle of police radios, the heavy boots of officers storming the house, and the ensuing chaos took over my home. I stood up slowly. My knees popped from sitting still so long. I adjusted my shawl over my shoulders, smoothed the skirt of my dress, and slipped the cell phone back into my apron pocket. I grabbed my iron keys, walked to my bedroom door, slid the key into the double deadbolt, and turned it. The heavy metal clanking unlocked echoed in the dark hallway. I pulled open the solid wood door and stepped out. I walked at a slow pace down the hallway toward the main living room. Every light was on. The spectacle before my eyes was worthy of a delivery room after a severe hemorrhage. Everything was out of place, filthy, marked by trauma. The glass coffee table was shattered. The drawers of the white cabinets had been ripped out and dumped across the imported rugs. The giant TV was gone from the wall, leaving black cables dangling like severed veins. In the center of the disaster sat my daughter and my son-in-law. Felix was sitting on the floor, hugging his knees, a trickle of blood running down his split lip, his silk pajamas smeared with mud. Marcy was shaking violently next to him, her hair a mess, her face as white as paper, answering a young cop's questions in a voice that was barely a whisper. Elias stood by the kitchen door, inspecting the damage to the sliding glass lock. When he saw me walk into the room, his eyes met mine. He gave me an almost imperceptible nod, confirming he knew I had orchestrated the timing of this lesson. Marcy looked up and saw me standing at the end of the hall. Her eyes, previously full of that condescending impatience, were now wide open, overflowing with a primal, childlike terror. "Mom!" she cried, her voice cracking as she tried to peel herself off the floor. "Mom, they broke in! They were going to kill us! They tied us down! They took everything! They almost killed Felix!" I didn't run to hug her. I didn't throw myself on the floor to cry with them. I stood tall, resting both hands on the handle of my cane, observing the scene with the exact same coldness I used to evaluate first-time mothers who thought childbirth wasn't going to hurt. My gaze dropped to the living room floor. The shiny white tiles, the ones Marcy had scrubbed 3 times a day because she couldn't stand the smell of an old dog, were covered in black mud, dirty boot prints, dry leaves from the canyon, and drops of her husband's blood. The pristine illusion of her lie had been trampled by the raw brutality of the real world. I looked up and locked eyes directly with my tear-soaked daughter. "The outside world makes a mess, Marcy?" I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the murmur of the cops and Felix's sniffling. "And without a guardian to protect you from the dirt ends up tracking right into your bedroom." The red and blue lights of the cruisers finally stopped flashing against the broken glass of the facade. It was 6 a.m. The air in the house had completely changed. The ridiculous scent of artificial lavender had been replaced by the metallic smell of fear, my son-in-law's cold sweat, and the dark gray dust the police techs left smeared on the doors and drawers looking for fingerprints that wouldn't do any good. The officers left with their notepads full of useless scribbles and empty promises of increased patrols. I knew, with the absolute certainty that 75 years on this earth gives you, that those thieves were already fencing the giant TV and the consoles in some black market on the other side of the city. The silence that followed the police's departure was crushing. I walked slowly toward the kitchen, leaning my weight on my old mesquite wood cane. My thick-soled shoes crunched over the remains of a porcelain vase Marcy had bought on one of her trips. I dodged the scattered drawers and stepped up to the stove. I turned on the burner and put water on to boil in my chipped enamel pot, the only piece of cookware of mine that survived my daughter's minimalist purge. Marcy and Felix were sitting on the high stools at the granite island. They looked like 2 ghosts. Felix held an ice pack to his split lip, staring blankly at the mud-stained floor. Marcy had her arms crossed over her chest, shivering even though the sun was already up and the morning heat was starting to bleed through the curtainless windows. "We have to hire private security, Felix," Marcy muttered, her voice raspy from crying so much. "We need electrified fences, motion sensor cameras, alarms wired straight to the cops. We can't sleep here another night like this." I scooped 2 tablespoons of spiced coffee into the boiling water. The strong, roasted aroma filled my space, giving me the jolt my old bones were begging for after a night on watch. "We had all of that," I said without looking at them, twisting the knob to kill the flame. "And it didn't cost us a single red cent in electricity." Marcy's head snapped up. Her red, swollen eyes drilled into my back. "What are you talking about, Mom?" "Please, don't start with your nonsense right now." "We were almost killed." Her voice pitched up, loaded with that hysteria spoiled people use when reality refuses to cater to their whims. I turned around slowly, cradling my hot mug in both hands. I leaned back against the kitchen counter and looked at her with the cold detachment of a surgeon about to make the first incision. I'm talking about Rusty, Marcy. I'm talking about the dog you threw out yesterday afternoon because his hair annoyed you on your white rug. The same rug that is currently soaked with your husband's blood. Felix groaned under his breath and adjusted the ice pack on his mouth, but he didn't dare look at me. He was an old dog, Mom. A street mutt. What was he going to do against two armed men? She shot back, desperately trying to defend her absurd decision. I let out a dry laugh, a harsh sound that echoed off the kitchen walls. That street mutt, as you call him, stopped 4 men over the last 5 years. 4. While the two of you were dead to the world with your AC blasting, Rusty was patrolling the canyon wall. He was trained by the state police, Marcy. He knew how to corner a man in the pitch black without making a single sound, right until the thief realized he had the jaws of a Belgian Malinois 4 inches from his throat. All the color drained from my daughter's face. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. Felix lowered the ice pack, revealing his swollen, purple lip. We had an attack dog loose in the backyard? Felix asked, his voice barely a squeak. Horrified. Every single night. You had a guardian. I corrected him, hardening my tone. A guardian who knew his family and respected his territory. A guardian who never asked for anything more than a bowl of kibble and a corner to sleep in. But you decided your aesthetic was more important than our safety. You cut the padlock off the front gate and let the wolves into the house. So don't come crying to me about your broken decorations. End quote. The chime of the front doorbell shattered the tension in the kitchen. It was exactly 8 a.m. Marcy jumped in her seat, terrified by the noise, as if the thieves had decided to come back in broad daylight. Did you call insurance, Felix? She asked, running her hands through her tangled hair. Wasn't me, he replied, shrugging. I set my enamel mug down on the counter and grabbed my cane. It was me, I announced, walking with a steady pace down the hall. And it's not insurance. I reached the front entryway, the digital lock now completely destroyed by the police's boots. I pulled open the heavy wooden door. Outside, standing on the threshold, was Arthur. He was wearing his usual gray suit, perfectly pressed, holding a worn black leather briefcase in his right hand. Despite his 78 years, his posture was ramrod straight and his gaze as sharp as a razor. Good morning, Sylvia, Arthur greeted, taking off his dark felt fedora with a polite nod. I am so sorry to arrive under these circumstances. Elias called me early this morning to inform me of the incident. Are you unharmed? Good morning, Arthur. Please, come in. I am perfectly fine. The damage here was purely material, and to their pride, I replied, stepping aside to let him pass. Arthur walked into the living room, assessing the disaster with expert eyes. He didn't flinch or pass judgment. He simply walked straight into the dining room, where the massive oak table, one of the few original pieces I had demanded we keep, remained intact. Marcy and Felix dragged themselves out of the kitchen, confused by the presence of this older man they barely remembered seeing at my husband's funeral over a decade ago. Mom, who is this man? Is he a private claims adjuster? Marcy asked, approaching with suspicion. I am Arthur Villalobos, your mother's attorney and a notary public. He introduced himself, setting his briefcase on the oak table and popping the metal latches with 2 sharp clicks. And I am not here to assess the damage to your furniture, ma'am. I am here to execute a legal directive regarding the status of this property. Felix frowned, letting out a groan as the movement pulled at his split lip. Property? What are you talking about? This is our house. We paid for the entire remodel 3 years ago. We sank over $100,000 into changing the floors, knocking down walls, and updating the wiring. Arthur pulled a thick manila folder from his briefcase. He opened it on the table with deliberate slowness, pulling out a stack of stamped papers signed in old blue ink. You invested in the interior decorating, son. Arthur corrected him, adjusting his glasses on the bridge of his nose. But the land, the foundation, the walls, and the title of this estate belong solely and exclusively to Sylvia. I have the original deed right here, the transfer of deed from her late husband, and the county property records updated as of yesterday. Your name, Felix, and yours, Marcy, do not appear on a single legal document granting you rights to this soil. Silence fell over the room once again, but this time, it wasn't the silence of fearing thieves. It was the silence of absolute panic in the face of lost power. Marcy looked at me, her eyes wide open, searching for an explanation I was not going to give her. Her mouth opened and closed without making a sound. The verbal agreement we made 5 years ago was crystal clear. I took the floor, stepping forward and resting both hands on the handle of my cane. You wanted to stop paying rent on your tiny downtown apartment. You offered to remodel the house so we could all live comfortably. I agreed to give you the upstairs and the common areas in exchange for respect, peace, and that you didn't mess with my routines or my companions in life. He's a dog, Mom! Marcy exploded, unable to hold back, slamming her palm against the oak table. You're putting on this whole circus over a disgusting animal. We were almost killed today and you're pulling out lawyer papers? Do not raise your voice at your mother in her own home. Arthur roared with a force you wouldn't expect for his age, slamming his fist on the table. The sound cracked like a gunshot, forcing Marcy to stumble back in fear. I stepped closer to the table, feeling my blood boiling but keeping my mind as cold as ice. No, Marcy. It's not over a dog. It's about what your action meant. You threw my family in the trash without consulting me. You treated me like a burden, like an unwanted guest in the house your father and I built brick by brick with the sweat off our backs. You thought that by putting a flat screen in my bedroom and buying my blood pressure pills, you had bought my submission. Felix tried to intervene, holding his hands up in a conciliatory gesture that only made him look more pathetic. Mother-in-law, please. We are all very on edge. The situation got out of hand, but we can fix this. We're family. This is our house. This was my house, Felix. Now it's just a broken glass box. I cut him off, staring daggers right through him. And you proved that you don't know how to live in it or how to protect it. You broke the pact. And in my world, the world of the old people you despise for being slow and outdated, a person's word carries more weight than any contract. Arthur took one of the pages from the folder and slid it across the table toward them. It was a document printed on official letterhead, covered in notary stamps and fresh signatures. This is an eviction notice for the termination of a verbal tenancy at will, the lawyer explained in a monotone, professional voice, as if he were reading the weather forecast. Legally, you are occupying this property as guests. The rightful owner has decided to revoke that permission. You have exactly 30 calendar days to pack your belongings, rip out your appliances if you so choose, and vacate the premises. Felix's knees seemed to give out. He dropped heavily into one of the dining chairs, burying his face in his hands. Marcy started shaking her head frantically, fresh tears of rage welling in her eyes. You can't do this to me. I'm your only daughter. She screamed, her voice tearing, completely forgetting her posture as a mature society woman. We have nowhere to go. We put all our savings into this house. You have 30 days to find a place. With your executive salaries, I'm sure you won't have any trouble renting one of those modern apartments you love so much. The ones where the neighbors don't talk to each other and the security guards fall asleep at the front desk. I replied, relentless. I felt no pity. I felt the raw, pure justice you only learn on the dusty streets of this neighborhood. Right at that moment, the shrill ring of my old cell phone shattered the tension in the dining room. It was a rustic, polyphonic ringtone that completely clashed with the remnants of high-tech gear the thieves hadn't managed to steal. I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out the device. The tiny screen lit up with Bobby's name, the computer genius from the flea market. I answered immediately and brought the phone to my ear. Tell me, Bobby, I said, ignoring my daughter's sobbing. We found him, Miss Sylvia. The kid's voice sounded euphoric on the other end, backed by the sound of engines and wind. That snobby lady posted him in a closed group for livestock sales. She gave him to some guy who owns a plot of land out by Santa Clara. The post said the dog was super aggressive and wouldn't let anyone touch him. Well, of course, he's a police dog, not a stuffed animal. A knot in my chest I didn't even know I had started to slowly untie. My shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. Where is he now? I asked, feeling a familiar warmth rush into my cheeks. Mr. Elias already went to get him. He pulled up to the farm half an hour ago with a highway patrol buddy of his. The farm guy had him chained to a lemon tree because Rusty wouldn't even let him get close enough to give him water. Mr. Elias just flashed his badge, told him a thing or two, and the guy practically begged for forgiveness. They're on their way back now. They'll be knocking on your door in 40 minutes. I closed my eyes for a second, silently thanking life, the memory of my husband, and the unbreakable loyalty of humble people who never forget a favor. Thank you, son. You have no idea the weight you just took off my shoulders. Tell your mother I'll be coming by next week, obviously, to pay this tab with interest, I told him, a smile forming all on its own across my wrinkled lips. Don't even think about it, Miss Sylvia. We owe you our lives here. Big hug. I hung up the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. When I opened my eyes, Marcy and Felix were staring at me like I was a total stranger. They had just witnessed how, while they crumbled in their own living room and couldn't even figure out how to call their insurance, I had mobilized an invisible army, reclaimed my property, and tracked down my stolen companion. The power shift in the room was so obvious you could practically touch it. While you were crying over your television, my people found my family. I informed them, my head held high. Rusty is on his way. He'll be here in less than an hour. Felix leaped out of the chair, backing away toward the hallway as if the dog were already walking through the door. The terror in his eyes was absolute. The trauma of the night mixed with the revelation that the animal they despised so much was, in fact, the rightful master of the shadows in this house. We can't be here, Felix stammered, awkwardly grabbing Marcy by the arm. Marcy, we can't stay. That dog is going to attack us. The thieves, the broken doors, no security. No. We're going to a hotel right now. Marcy, defeated, drained of all her classism and arrogance, nodded slowly. Her tears had smeared her expensive makeup, leaving black streaks under her eyes. She looked small, fragile, exactly like when she was a little girl and scraped her knees playing in the dirt on the unpaved street. She didn't say a word to me. There were no apologies, no screaming, no threats to drag me to court. She knew she had lost. She knew Arthur Villalobos wasn't a man you could play games with, and that my patience had completely run out. They walked, holding each other, toward the stairs, dragging their feet up the steps to pack a couple of suitcases. Arthur adjusted his glasses and started putting his documents back into the manila folder. I will sign and stamp the copies at the notary office by noon today. Sylvia, I'll send the official notice over with a courier this afternoon, just to fulfill legal protocol. Though, judging by the look on those two, I highly doubt they're going to fight the 30-day window. They won't, Arthur. They're cowards. They confuse comfort with strength. I replied, walking him to the front door. I am deeply grateful you came so quickly. That's what old friends are for. The lawyer smiled, giving my shoulder a gentle pat. Lock up what's left of this door and give Officer Rusty my best when he gets here. Arthur stepped out into the street, now bathed in full morning sunlight. I stood on the threshold, feeling the warm breeze on my face. I heard the hurried footsteps of my daughter and son-in-law coming downstairs with their rolling suitcases, tripping over the rubble of their perfect life. They walked out the door without saying goodbye, climbed into their luxury car parked on the street, and sped off, running away from the ghosts of their own ignorance. I closed the door behind them, pushing the splintered pieces of wood together so they'd fit as best they could. The house was wrecked, dirty, and silent. But for the first time in 5 years, I took a deep breath and felt that the air truly belonged to me. The loud rumble of Elias's truck engine cut through the silence of the street at exactly 9 a.m. I was sitting on the wooden dining chair, hands resting on the oak table, waiting. When I heard the squeal of tires braking in front of my gate, I felt the air rush back into my lungs with the strength of my best years. I stood up slowly, leaning my weight on the mesquite cane, and walked toward the entrance. The heavy wooden door was still splintered from the early morning blows, but that didn't matter anymore. When I opened it, the sun hit me square in the face. There was Elias, climbing out of his truck with the heavy gait of a retired cop. He walked to the back of the vehicle and dropped the tailgate. There was no need to call him. Rusty leaped from the bed of the truck onto the concrete sidewalk with an agility that defied his 9 years. His massive paws hit the ground, and his head snapped up instantly. His ears perked up as he recognized the street, the smell of the nearby canyon, and above all, the sight of me standing in the doorway of the house. He didn't run like some crazy puppy. Rusty was a working dog, an old soldier. He walked toward me at a brisk, steady pace, his brown tail thumping side to side in sharp, rhythmic swings. When he reached my feet, he lowered his head and shoved his wet snout against the palm of my hand. The touch of his rough toasted coffee coat was the best medicine for the exhaustion of the night. He smelled like strange dirt, dry grass, and the stress of being chained up in an unknown place. But beneath all that, he still smelled like my home. I kneeled down with some effort, ignoring the pain in my knees, and wrapped my arms around his thick neck. I buried my face in his back and took a deep breath. "You're here, boy," I whispered in his ear, feeling his heartbeat fall into rhythm with my own. "You're back in your territory." Elias walked over, taking off his cap to wipe the sweat from his forehead. Took some convincing to get the farm guy to unhook the chain, Sylvia. The animal wouldn't let him get within 6 feet. He was furious, stressed out from not having a clear perimeter to guard. But the second he saw me step out of my buddy's patrol car and I called him by his name, he calmed right down. He knew we were coming for him. "I owe you a big one, Elias. You and everyone else who moved heaven and earth tonight," I said, standing back up with the help of my cane, while Rusty glued himself to my left leg, assuming his natural guard position. "You don't owe me a damn thing. Woman! You brought my grandkids into this world when the hospital closed its doors on us. These are your people, and your people don't leave their own behind." The old cop said goodbye with a nod and climbed back into his truck. I stood at the door until the vehicle turned the corner and disappeared from sight. Then I looked at my dog and gave a slight nod toward the inside of the house. Rusty walked in. Instantly, his posture changed. The muscles in his shoulders coiled tight, and the hair on his back raised slightly. His incredible nose went to work. He sniffed the black mud on the white porcelain floor. He sniffed the stale scent of fear my son-in-law had left lingering in the air, and he stopped right in front of the dried blood staining the imported living room rug. He let out a low growl, a guttural sound that vibrated in his ribs. He knew his house had been desecrated. He knew other men had walked through his domain while he wasn't there to stop them. "It's over, Rusty. They're gone," I told him in a firm voice. The exact same voice I used to calm mothers when panic took over mid-delivery. The dog looked at me with his amber eyes, understood the command, and stopped growling. He walked straight down the hallway, following his usual route to the backyard. I followed him at a slow pace. When he reached the sliding glass door, the one with the broken lock, Rusty stepped out onto the damp grass. He went straight to the brick wall bordering the canyon. He sniffed the crushed rose bushes and the boot tracks in the dirt. He lifted his leg and marked his territory on every corner, reclaiming what was his. His message was loud and clear. The Guardian had returned. That very afternoon, the moving truck my daughter hired parked in front of the house. Marcy and Felix didn't even have the guts to show up in person. They sent 4 movers with cardboard boxes and bubble wrap to take all their belongings. For hours, the men walked in and out, taking down the giant TV mount, carrying out the mud-stained white sofas, hauling away the broken glass tables, and packing up every last minimalist decoration I despised so much. I sat in my wicker chair in the corner of the living room with Rusty laying at my feet, watching the parade. The movers kept side-eyeing the dog, intimidated by his size and his silence, but Rusty didn't do a thing. He knew the difference between intruders and simple workers. When the truck left and the house was empty, the silence that settled in was different. It was no longer the oppressive silence of the central AC, masking the sounds of the street. It was a clean, vast silence, full of echoes and possibilities. I walked through the deserted living room. The porcelain floor was filthy and covered in dust, but the house felt grand again, solid. I walked over to the windows and threw the curtains wide open. I opened the glass panes and let the hot afternoon air rush in. The neighborhood wind swept away the final traces of the artificial lavender scent. I grabbed an old straw broom, a tin dustpan, and a bucket of water with bar soap. At 75 years old, sweeping an entire house is no easy task. But strength doesn't always come from muscle. A lot of times, it comes from pure willpower. I swept the mud, gathered the broken glass, and scrubbed my son-in-law's dried blood. As I cleaned, I thought about my trade as a midwife. Bringing a life into the world is a violent, loud, and messy process. There is blood, there is sweat, there are screams that shatter your eardrums, and fluids that stain the white sheets. City women, the ones who pay for expensive clinics, think birth should be an aseptic event, surrounded by machines and cold lights. But I know the truth. Life is born from the mud, from the pain, and from the tearing. This house had just given birth to a new reality. The break-in at dawn was the painful labor. The fear, the violence, and the cowardly retreat of my daughter and her husband were the blood and the afterbirth. And now, as I ran the wet mop over the floor, I was washing the newborn. I was reclaiming my space. The following days brought a transformation that the walls of this house had been screaming for. The first morning, Bobby, the computer kid, showed up at my door with a heavy toolbox and 2 forged steel padlocks. Without charging me a single dime, he uninstalled the useless digital lock from the front door and put in a traditional deadbolt, the kind that requires a real key, the kind that weighs heavy in your pocket. Then he went to the backyard and welded a thick iron latch onto the sliding glass door, so the next guy who tries to stick a pry bar in the track will break his teeth trying. "Miss Sylvia," the kid told me, wiping the grease off his hands with a rag, "tell Rusty to stop looking at me so mean. I come in peace." That same afternoon, Shirley, the woman who runs the flea market, brought me a clay pot full of sweet corn tamales and a jug of hot atoll. We sat in the chairs at my oak table, the only table left in the dining room, and talked for hours. We talked about the old days, about the babies I helped deliver who were now married men and women, about the heavy rains that used to flood the neighborhood before they paved the main streets. The isolation my daughter had forced upon me vanished like smoke. Marcy thought that hiding me in the back room and surrounding me with her borrowed luxury was taking care of me. She never understood that isolating an old person is the cruelest way to kill them while they're still breathing. By stripping away her expensive decorations and her absurd cleaning rules, the house opened its doors back up to my people. 3 weeks passed. Arthur Villalobos called me on a Tuesday afternoon to confirm that the voluntary eviction paperwork had been finalized at the notary. Marcy and Felix signed the rights waivers without a fight. They moved into an apartment complex on the other side of the city, a place full of iron gates, private security guards, and surveillance cameras on every corner. They preferred paying a fortune in HOA fees to live locked inside another glass bubble, convinced that money can buy the peace their cowardice stripped away. Marcy tried to contact me exactly once. She sent a text message to my old cell phone. It read, "I hope you're happy with your dog. Felix still has nightmares. When you realize you can't keep up that house all by yourself, don't call us." I read the glowing letters on the tiny screen, pressed the delete button, and turned off the device. I felt no resentment, no sadness, no guilt. I felt absolute clarity. People who don't know how to honor the ground they walk on are condemned to live their lives running from their own shadows. One Sunday afternoon, I pulled my antique furniture out of the storage room where it had been shoved away my old cedar wardrobe, a hand-woven wicker rocking chair, and a couple of dark wood bookcases. I arranged them in the living room, giving the house back its character, its smell of living wood and solid memories. I sat in the rocking chair by the window. The sun was setting, painting the clean walls in a warm orange hue. I reached into the pocket of my cotton apron and pulled out my heavy iron keychain. The cold metal quickly warmed against my palm. Those keys now opened every reinforced door, every new padlock, and every opportunity to keep dictating the rules of my own existence. Next to me, resting on a small wooden side table, was my black vinyl notebook. I flipped it open at random. The yellowed pages crinkled softly. My index finger traced the names written in cursive. Hundreds of lives, hundreds of stories that began between my hands, stained with blood and iodine. Society is deeply mistaken about old age. They look at us with pity, assuming our slow steps are a symptom of weakness and our silences are a sign of ignorance. They think modern technology, smartphone apps, and motion sensor cameras trump the wisdom of the years. But the world is still the exact same savage place it has always been. Evil, greed, and danger don't stop for a touchscreen or a white rug. My power, the power I rediscovered the night they tried to take my dog from me, doesn't lie in physical strength. It lies in memory. It lies in knowing who to call, in understanding how true loyalties work, and in not being afraid of the filth of the world. The deep roots of my past are the highest wall any intruder could ever try to climb. Night finally fell over the neighborhood. I turned off the only lamp on in the living room and walked down the hallway in the dark. I didn't need light to find my way. I knew every uneven floorboard, every breath of this brick and concrete structure. I reached my bedroom, the one in the back, the one that was always mine. The window was open, letting in the cool breeze creeping up from the bottom of the canyon. Rusty was lying on his worn-out rug at the foot of my bed. Hearing my footsteps, he lifted his head and thumped his tail against the floor a couple of times. I walked over to him, leaned down, and stroked his broad forehead. His amber eyes shined in the dim light, full of that silent, unbreakable loyalty that no human being, especially those raised in spoiled abundance, could ever begin to understand. "Time to work, guard," I told him quietly. Rusty stood up immediately, walked to my bedroom door, stepped out into the hallway, and headed for the sliding glass door in the kitchen. He didn't need me to open it for him. He had his own access through the dog door built into the aluminum frame. I watched him cross into the backyard and vanish into the pitch black of the night. I leaned out the window. Out there, between the tall weeds of the empty lot and the brick wall separating us from the canyon, a massive, brown shadow began its patrol. His steps made no sound. His breathing blended with the wind. Any thug looking up at this house from the bottom of the abyss would know that the fortress was no longer made of glass. It was once again made of stone and fangs. I sat on the edge of my mattress, pulled my shawl over my shoulders, and closed my eyes, knowing that the world out there might be rotting with dark intentions. But in here, in the house that I built, the darkness obeys my rules.